let's continue covering in depth the fascinating North American exploits of Count Frontenac and New France under the Sun King Louis the XIV.
Frontenac and Duchesneau, 1675 to 1682. While writing to Frontenac in terms of studied mildness, the king and Colbert took measures to curb his power. Since the departure of the Intendant Talon, his office had been vacant, and Frontenac was left to rule alone. This seems to have been an experiment on the part of his masters at Versailles, who, knowing the peculiarities of his temper, were perhaps willing to try the effect of leaving him without a colleague. The experiment had not succeeded. An intendant was now, therefore, sent to Quebec, not only to manage the details of administration, but also to watch the governor, keep him, if possible, within prescribed bounds, and report his proceedings to the minister. The change was far from welcome to Frontenac, whose delight it was to hold all the reins of power in his own hands. All the signs of the sky foreboded storm. The storm soon came. A dispute quickly followed. The governor's chief adversaries were the bishop and the ecclesiastics. Duchesneau, the new intendant, took part with them. The bishop and his clergy were on their side very glad of a secular ally, for their power had greatly fallen. They avoided as far as they could a direct collision with him, and waged vicarious war in the person of their friend the intendant. Duchesneau was not of a conciliating spirit, and he felt strong in the support of the clergy, while Frontenac, when his temper was roused, would fight with haughty and impracticable obstinacy for any position which he had once assumed, however trivial or however mistaken. There was incessant friction between the two colleagues in the exercise of their respective functions, and occasions of difference were rarely wanting. Colbert interposed, ordered Duchesneau to treat Frontenac with becoming deference, and warned him not to make himself the partisan of the bishop, while at the same time he exhorted Frontenac to live in harmony with the intendant. The dispute continued till the king lost his patience. "Through all my kingdom," he wrote to the governor, "I do not hear of so many difficulties on this matter, since you ought to be satisfied with being the representative of my person in the country where I have placed you in command." At the same time Colbert corrects the intendant. "A memorial," he wrote, "has been placed in my hands, wherein there continually appears a great pretension on your part to establish an equality between the governor and you. I think I have already said enough to lead you to know yourself, and to understand the difference between a governor and an intendant, so that it is no longer necessary for me to enter into particulars which could only serve to show you that you are completely in the wrong." Scarcely was this quarrel suppressed when another sprang up. The king had recently ordered that the intendant, though holding only the third rank in the council, should act as its president. The commission of Duchesneau, however, empowered him to preside only in the absence of the governor, while Frontenac is styled chief and president of the council in several of the dispatches addressed to him. Here was an inconsistency. Both parties claimed the right of presiding, and both could rest their claim on a clear expression of the royal will. Frontenac rarely began a new quarrel till the autumn vessels had sailed for France, because a full year must then elapse before his adversaries could send their complaints to the king, and 6 months more before the king could send back his answer. The governor had been heard to say, on one of these occasions, that he should now be master for 18 months, subject only to answering with his head for what he might do. It was when the last vessel was gone in the autumn of 1678 that he demanded to be styled chief and president on the records of the council, and he showed a letter from the king in which he was so entitled. In spite of this, Duchesneau resisted, and appealed to precedent to sustain his position. A long series of stormy sessions followed. The councillors in the clerical interest supported the intendant. Frontenac, chafed and angry, refused all compromise. Business was stopped for weeks. Duchesneau lost temper and became abusive. Frontenac struck the table with his fist, and told him fiercely that he would teach him his duty. Every day embittered the strife. The governor made the declaration usual with him on such occasions, that he would not permit the royal authority to suffer in his person. At length he banished from Quebec his 3 most strenuous opponents, and commanded them to remain in their country houses till they received his farther orders. All attempts at compromise proved fruitless. The answer came in the following summer. "Monsieur le Comte de Frontenac," wrote Louis the XIV, I am surprised to learn all the new troubles and dissensions that have occurred in my country of New France, more especially since I have clearly and strongly given you to understand that your sole care should be to maintain harmony and peace among all my subjects dwelling therein. But what surprises me still more is that in nearly all the disputes which you have caused you have advanced claims which have very little foundation. My edicts, declarations, and ordinances had so plainly made known to you my will, that I have great cause of astonishment that you, whose duty it is to see them faithfully executed, have yourself set up pretensions entirely opposed to them. You have wished to be styled chief and president on the records of the Supreme Council, which is contrary to my edict concerning that council, and I am the more surprised at this demand, since I am very sure that you are the only man in my kingdom who, being honoured with the title of governor and lieutenant general, would care to be styled chief and president of such a council as that of Quebec. He then declares that neither Frontenac nor the Intendant is to have the title of president, but that the Intendant is to perform the functions of presiding officer as determined by the edict. He continues, "Moreover, your abuse of the authority which I have confided to you in exiling 2 councillors and the Attorney General for so trivial a cause cannot meet my approval. And were it not for the distinct assurances given me by your friends that you will act with more moderation in future, and never again fall into offences of this nature, I should have resolved on recalling you." Colbert wrote to him with equal severity, "I have communicated to the King the contents of all the dispatches which you have written to me during the past year, and as the matters of which they treat are sufficiently ample, including dissensions almost universal among those whose duty it is to preserve harmony in the country under your command, His Majesty has been pleased to examine all the papers sent by all the parties interested, and more particularly those appended to your letters. He has thereupon ordered me distinctly to make known to you his intentions." The minister then proceeds to reprove him sharply in the name of the King, and concludes, "It is difficult for me to add anything to what I have just said. Consider well that, if it is any advantage or any satisfaction to you that His Majesty should be satisfied with your services, it is necessary that you change entirely the conduct which you have hitherto pursued." This, one would think, might have sufficed to bring the governor to reason, but the violence of his resentments and antipathies overcame the very slender share of prudence with which nature had endowed him. Every ship from Canada brought to the King fresh complaints of Duchesneau against Frontenac, and of Frontenac against Duchesneau, and the King replied with rebukes, exhortations, and threats to both. At first he had shown a disposition to extenuate and excuse the faults of Frontenac, but every year his letters grew sharper. In 1681 he wrote, "Again I urge you to banish from your mind the difficulties which you have yourself devised against the execution of my orders, to act with mildness and moderation towards all the colonists, and divest yourself entirely of the personal animosities which have thus far been almost your sole motive of action. In conclusion, I exhort you once more to profit well by the directions which this letter contains, since, unless you succeed better herein than formerly, I cannot help recalling you from the command which I have entrusted to you." The dispute still went on. The autumn ships from Quebec brought back the usual complaints, and the long-suffering King at length made good his threat. Both Frontenac and Duchesneau received their recall, and they both deserved it. The last official act of the governor, recorded in the register of the Council of Quebec, is the formal declaration that his rank in that body is superior to that of the Intendant. The key to nearly all these disputes lies in the relations between Frontenac and the Church. The fundamental quarrel was generally covered by superficial issues, and it was rarely that the governor fell out with anybody who was not in league with the bishop and the Jesuits. "Nearly all the disorders in New France," he writes, "spring from the ambition of the ecclesiastics, who want to join to their spiritual authority an absolute power over things temporal, and who persecute all who do not submit entirely to them." He says that the Intendant and the councillors are completely under their control, and dare not decide any question against them, that they have spies everywhere, even in his house, that the bishop told him that he could excommunicate even a governor if he chose, that the missionaries in Indian villages say that they are equals of Ononcio, and tell their converts that all will go wrong till the priests have the government of Canada, that directly or indirectly they meddle in all civil affairs, that they trade even with the English of New York, that what with Jesuits, Sulpicians, the bishop, and the seminary of Quebec, they hold 2/3 of the good lands of Canada, that in view of the poverty of the country, their revenues are enormous, that in short, their object is mastery and that they use all means to compass it. The recall of the governor was a triumph to the ecclesiastics, offset but slightly by the recall of their instrument, the Intendant, who had done his work and whom they needed no longer. Thus far, we have seen Frontenac on his worst side. Nor must it be supposed that the years which had passed since his government began, tempestuous as they appear on the record, were wholly given over to quarreling. They had their periods of uneventful calm, when the wheels of administration ran as smoothly as could be expected, in view of the condition of the colony. In one respect at least, Frontenac had shown a remarkable fitness for his office. Few white men have ever equaled or approached him in the art of dealing with Indians. There seems to have been a sympathetic relation between him and them. He conformed to their ways, borrowed their rhetoric, flattered them on occasion with great address, and yet constantly maintained towards them an attitude of paternal superiority. When they were concerned, his native haughtiness always took a form which commanded respect without exciting anger. He would not address them as brothers, but only as children, and even the Iroquois, arrogant as they were, accepted the new relation. In their eyes, Frontenac was by far the greatest of all the Onuncios, or governors of Canada. They admired the prompt and fiery soldier who played with their children and gave beads and trinkets to their wives, who read their secret thoughts and never feared them, but smiled on them when their hearts were true, or frowned and threatened them when they did amiss. The other tribes, allies of the French, were of the same mind, and their respect for their great father seems not to have been permanently impaired by his occasional practice of bullying them for purposes of extortion. Frontenac appears to have had a liking not only for Indians, but also for that roving and lawless class of the Canadian population, the coureurs de bois, provided always that they were not in the service of his rivals. Indeed, as regards the Canadians generally, he refrained from the strictures with which succeeding governors and intendants freely interlarded their dispatches. It was not his instinct to clash with the humbler classes, and he generally reserved his anger for those who could retort it. He had the air of distinction natural to a man familiar all his life with the society of courts, and he was as gracious and winning on some occasions as he was unbearable on others. When in good humor, his ready wit and a certain sympathetic vivacity made him very agreeable. At times he was all sunshine, and his outrageous temper slumbered peacefully till some new offense wakened it again. Nor is there much doubt that many of his worst outbreaks were the work of his enemies, who knew his foible, and studied to exasperate him. He was full of contradictions, and intolerant and implacable as he often was, there were intervals, even in his bitterest quarrels, in which he displayed a surprising moderation and patience. By fits he could be magnanimous. A woman once brought him a petition in burlesque verse. Frontenac wrote a jocose answer. The woman, to ridicule him, contrived to have both petition and answer slipped among the papers of a suit pending before the council. Frontenac had her fined a few francs, and then caused the money to be given to her children. When he sailed for France, it was a day of rejoicing to more than half the merchants of Canada, and, excepting the Récollets, to all the priests. But he left behind him an impression very general among the people that, if danger threatened the colony, Count Frontenac was the man for the hour.